Right, so good afternoon, everybody. I'm Laura Gage, Marketing and PR Manager at the North East Automotive Alliance, and welcome to another of our NEA webinars, this time looking at the talent agenda, in particular recruitment, retention, and the associated challenges that we are facing both now and post-COVID-19. I think because we all know that the way we're going to be doing business in the future is going to be very different, and as a result this will have an impact on how we're going to engage and interact with that pool of talent, as well as our own recruitment processes. So we're delighted to be joined by Talent84, who are an NEA member, and they're a family of recruitment businesses who specialise in specialist and tailored staffing solutions for clients. And with 35 years of experience, I'm sure you agree they'll be well placed to deliver this session. So please ask any questions you have. You can ask these using the chat facility, which you can see in your bottom bottom toolbar there. The chats will come through to me, so they're kept all confidential, and we can post them to the guys at the end of the session, or alternatively, because we have a manageable number, then you can unmute yourself at the end and ask questions. And this session we're going to have a bit of interaction. We've got a couple of polls. We don't have a poll feature within the webinar itself, but we're going to use the chat facility again. So if you could get that chat up and ready, and post your answers in, then we'll collate those and feed them back. So without taking up any more time, I'd like to hand over to Andrew Mears, who's the Chief Operating Officer at Talent84. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you. Thanks very much, and good to see everybody this afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. And what I'm going to try and do is keep this pretty punchy and to the point, and leave as much time as possible for discussion and dialogue at the end, because in all the webinars that I've done over the last 3 weeks, and I think if it was possible to overdose on webinars, I may have. I think the best thing comes out of the interaction and the people commenting about their experiences. So I'm going to try and keep as much time for that as possible at the end of the session. So yeah, as Laura said, the agenda for today is to discuss a bit of a very brief intro to who Talent84 are. I'm conscious it's a brand that not everybody will recognise. I'm going to set a bit of scene around COVID-19, talk a little bit about future talent challenges, a little bit about review and remodel, and then adapting recruitment for new normal. So hopefully what people will get at the end of this is just a couple of nuggets that they can take away, or things that they can think about, or things that we can discuss in the Q&A at the end. And what you're getting here really is my views, but also the views of the people I've been talking to extensively over the last however many 40 odd days that it is now, and pre that, where we've been discussing some of the challenges that exist today, but more importantly, what's going to happen in the future. So, first poll, as Laura said, I do want this to be interactive. So on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being absolutely not and 10 being absolutely yes, who would like the words unprecedented and furlough removed from the English language? Let's see how people can get onto that and use that chat facility. What are we seeing, Laura?
11.
Very good. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
High. 9, 10.
Yeah, good, very good. Yeah, I agree.
20, 9.
Yeah. Yes, good. Okay, so we've got the chat functionality going. That's good, because that's important. So I want to make this as interactive as possible all the way through. So thank you for that. Okay, so a very quick introduction to Talent84. Some of you might not know that brand, but the brand includes 4 key brands: Solutions Recruitment, Ship to Shore, EPG, and Atlantic Energy Partners, or AE Partners, which is our US representation. Myself, I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Talent84. Some of you may know Michael Grayson, who's our Chief Executive. But our organization has been around since 1984, and we provide diversified talent solutions across temporary and permanent recruitment in all manner of different sectors, from energy and oil and gas to automotive to food. My particular expertise or my particular background is before I moved into recruitment in the early noughties, I was an HR manager. So I worked in HR and actually spent 5 years of my life working in tier one automotive in the Nissan and Jaguar Land Rover supply chains. So an industry that I know reasonably well and have a lot of friends in the industry today. So good to see some familiar names and faces in the chat. So the first thing I want to talk about is just setting the COVID-19 scene, and my views on this. You know, I have a philosophy that I talk about in our business is that we live and operate in something called a VUCA world. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the concept of a VUCA world, it's an American military term that has then been developed by Harvard business professors and employed in the business world. And it just really describes the fact that we live in a world today that is volatile, unpredictable, complex, and ambiguous. It's one that is characterized by change. Businesses are used to working under conditions of business continuity planning, reacting to breakdowns, reacting to logistical problems, reacting to ports closing, etc., but never have we ever really dealt with the level and scale of change that we are dealing with today. And when I talk about the change, the thing that I think has really hit so many people is the volume of it, the breadth of the change, the speed of the change has been incredible. You know, for those of you who weren't on the conversation earlier, Bruce and I were just sort of sharing some of our experiences around some of the spikes in different demands, and they've just been so quick, from one end of the spectrum, stockpiling, to then the other end of the spectrum where people aren't buying anything in particular categories, and it's changing daily, and to deal with those changes is putting us under so much pressure. The thing that's quite interesting with change, though, and the thing that I find really interesting, is the level of adoption. So one of the things that we've seen in all of this pandemic is people actually adopting to changes that under normal circumstances they would not, or they would certainly be more resistant. In many respects, people haven't had the choice. They have had to change. And I think that's going to affect us in lots of different ways moving forward. But in principle, I think what we're going to start to see is that people's priorities and their expectations, and then in turn their behaviors, are going to change and evolve, not just in the short term, but in the long term. And I think some of the impacts of the pandemic are going to continue to drive some of those behavior changes moving forward. And these are all things that are going to affect and interact with our talent agenda, as I'm going to come on to shortly. So just second quick poll, and answering yes or no in the chat to Laura, I'd just like to gauge how many of you have started to initiate future recruitment plans. Just give you 20 or 30 seconds to answer that question. How are we looking, Laura?
It's pretty much 50-50.
50-50, yeah. Okay, all right, interesting. Okay, really interesting. So if we think about future talent challenges, what I'm sort of doing here is trying to refer to some of the lessons that we learned in 2008 in the financial crisis. At the time, I was living and working in Holland, but you know, we were still touched by the financial crisis and the impact on the talent industry, but I was working in recruitment by then. Just thinking about then the next challenges. So who thinks that answering harder or easier, what do we think recruitment will be like in the next 12 months? Okay, Laura?
We've got a pretty much a 70-30 split. Most people saying harder.
Yeah, Okay, that's really interesting. All right, good. Okay, so some of the things that we learned in 2008 that came out of the financial crisis. Obviously, we went into a period of economic hardship, and I think it's fair to say that everybody is expecting a period of economic hardship following the pandemic, or as the pandemic goes on its journey. We don't know what that's going to look like, so we're kind of guesstimating. Talk of the V recession, massive bounce back, other people talking about and then some of the on the conversation we were talking about a bath-shaped recession, where there's a longer period of economic hardship, and that's going to drive certain behaviours. What we are expecting to see is that there's going to be some redundancies, there's going to be some long-term casualties as a consequence of the pandemic, and that is going to create a number of candidates in the marketplace and people who are looking for work. Our experience in 2008 is that created an awful lot of what I described as white noise. Mm-hmm. It created an awful lot of activity that wasn't necessarily beneficial to businesses that were looking to hire. And what it meant was that there was a huge labor-intensive push on trying to process the amount of applications that people were getting for roles, which unfortunately were just not relevant, but people were applying for roles because they were looking for work. And that has an impact on the speed and the quality of your ability to recruit. What we also found then was that there was a general air of uncertainty. And I think we're going to have that again. I think we're going to have people who are going to adopt the strategy of better the devil you know than better the devil you don't. And people who, might sit on the fence a little bit, but if they got a phone call from someone about a particular opportunity who would ordinarily take a look at that opportunity, I don't think they will. And I think, businesses are going to have to think very hard about how they try and attract those people that are perhaps on the fence. They're neither active nor are they passive in terms of their candidate status. What it also led businesses to do was to focus very, very hard on retaining the key skills and talent and experience in their business for them to be able to navigate through a difficult period, a difficult trading period, whether that be because of a global recession or whether because their particular market was going to be under some extreme pressure. Retention strategies typically improved, and it put a lot of pressure on businesses who were then looking to attract particular talent in terms of how they then tempted people into their organizations. So it was a real perfect storm. Lots of white noise that was created that meant there was lots of opportunity to create more work and miss things. It also was then the uncertainty where people were not sure about whether they wanted to risk taking the move. And then businesses were then working much harder to retain their top talent. So what it meant was actually the right kind of talent that people wanted to recruit was at a real premium. And it put businesses who were looking to hire under some real pressure. So I think we're going to go back into that. But in addition to that, I think what we're also going to get is that changing priorities and expectations of people as a consequence of this pandemic, and changes in behavior around social distancing, around what they're going to be looking for in an employer. What are they going to be looking for in terms of expectations about security? How are you going to try and mitigate the uncertainty that they might be experiencing? And businesses need to think really hard about how they're going to do that. Is it increased notice periods? Is it reducing probationary periods? What are the things that they need to do to really try and reassure people in the early stages of their employment? All in all, I think we're going to have real competition for talent. So the next sort of thing that I wanted to talk about was how do we review and remodel? And I'm slightly worried by some of the conversations that I'm having with businesses at the minute, who are telling me that they're confident that things are going to come back and they're just going to restart where they left off. And the thing I refer to there's a Kipling quote on the screen in front of you, but I'm a big believer in keeping it simple, and why, who, how, and where are really simple ways of thinking about how you start to redesign your labor planning to support your business objectives. So in terms of reviewing and remodeling, I want to really just try and emphasize that I don't think this is a restart. I think this is a reset. So I think the businesses who think that they're just going to be able to restart where they left off in February or January need to question that, and they need to challenge themselves. And I think this is really an opportunity to reset. And I think they need to reset to be able to deal with and evolve with the changing requirements of the marketplace. And so where Kipling's 6 honest serving men come into play is really helping on thinking about the things that you need to do. So if you're in the HR community, or if you're a leader in a business, the things that I would encourage you to think about are the what, the why, the when, the how, the where, and the who. And the kind of things to think about in your labor planning is, what do I need? What do I need from a structure perspective? What do I need in terms of capabilities? What do I need in terms of experience, skills, and knowledge? And really work hard to distill what they look like in the new normal. Why do we need to do that? Well, I think we need to do that to understand market opportunity. There could be reduced demand. There could be a capability gap. And we will need different types of experience to be able to take advantage of that. I think there's a timing thing that people need to think about. It's not going to be a case of rushing into the market necessarily in the short term. This could be medium term. This could be something that runs into early 2021. But we need to start putting the labor planning foundations in now. How, I think, is a really important one, because skills don't necessarily need to come from recruitment. It could be about recrafting job descriptions and responsibilities within your own existing capability resource pool. So look at whether there are internal development opportunities that are going to support your business to better fulfill the needs of the new market. But there may be a recruitment aspect. There could also be an outsourcing aspect. Do we need to get a different supplier to actually help us with a particular set of skills? You know, it could be trying to penetrate a new marketplace. That actually might be best served by outsourcing it to a partner or somebody else who's better placed to do that work for you on your behalf. But these are the things you need to be thinking about. Where is obviously geography, markets, and industries, and where those particular skill sets and experiences and opportunities lie. And then the who is about really understanding what you need and who you need from the people perspective, from the businesses who operate in those spaces. But call on your networks. Let's use the networks that are available and take advantage of them. The Northeast Automotive Alliance is a great example of like-minded professionals working in the same sector, pulling their resources together. But equally, there's been a real sense of community that has developed, I think, as a consequence of the pandemic. There are some people on here who I know that either I've spoken to or my colleagues have spoken to, competitors of sharing information, supporting one another. You know, let's take advantage of those networks to support what we need to do moving forward. But I think it's important we understand that what we did previously is not necessarily going to be a barometer of success in the new normal. So we need to challenge ourselves to think differently. And then at a really practical level, what does that mean from recruitment perspective? So the kind of things I'm talking to clients about at the minute, and the things that clients are telling me that they're thinking about, and I just want to share with you some food for thought, really, to try and get people's perspectives and get you thinking a little bit about the challenges that might lie in front of you. So the first thing I would say is that for some time now, we've been living in Jeff's world. And when I say living in Jeff's world, people who've worked in our organization will have heard me talk about Jeff Bezos and how I think he's changed the world. But in general, experience and what we expect as consumers, whether that be in a B2C world or a B2B world, our expectation levels are higher than they have ever been before. And I'm going to be interested to see how that evolves over the coming months and years, but I suspect they will just continue to increase. But that's really important from an experience perspective as to how are we going to maintain those high expectations that our candidates have, or people that you might want to bring into your business, when we are employing new ways of working that might undermine what you have done previously to ensure your candidates get a great candidate experience. So from a recruitment process perspective, which is where I think the biggest practical implications are going to be, I think there are some things that you need to think about. So the first thing on process is about streamlining, and that's purely to do with human interaction and the level of human interaction, or employing social distancing or supporting social distancing. I'm not saying remove human interaction, but I think if there are platforms and methods available that would perhaps minimize the amount of interaction that you candidates have to have with people in your organization, but at the same time protect your employees from interaction with multiple external visitors coming on the site. I think there need to be things thought around the streamlining of processes. Equally, that then impacts on the location and the environment. So I'm running some interviews for a client at the moment where we are doing face-to-face interviews. We are getting people to go into their office to meet some key people, but we're having to be very, very structured about the social distancing. So we've positioned the meeting room that we use at the front of the building, so they don't have to walk through any corridors where they're going to come into contact with anybody else. So their first entrance point is into the main reception, and the meeting room is literally within a matter of feet of the main reception. It's been positioned to ensure that social distancing is employed, and we've capped the amount of people who can be involved in the interview process at any one time. So there's never any more than 2 interviewers for 1 candidate. So these are the kind of things that you need to be thinking about logistically. Equally, we've heard a lot about technology, and this is a great example of, you know, there are some people I'm sure who have never done a webinar before and have probably done a couple of dozen in the last few months. These kind of platforms are great, but Bruce at the start of the call raised a really valid point, which is not everybody necessarily has access to this type of technology. So I think for me, it's about understanding and making sure that we've got multiple tools at our disposal to be able to continue with our recruitment process, but at the same time, support some people who don't necessarily have the technology. However, I think what you're going to find is the flip side to that as well. There are going to be candidates out there who will expect you to use some kind of video platform as part of the interview process to minimize that social interaction, or certainly support social distancing and interactivity. I think that is just going to be the norm now. As part of that, I think there's a huge training element that businesses need to think about. I think we just take for granted that people can do video interviewing or have conversations on Zoom calls or Teams or FaceTime or whatever it may be, and do them well. And I think that's dangerous. I don't think we would let any of our management do face-to-face interviews with people without them being trained. Equally, I think you need to be training people on how to use these technologies in the right way to be able to conduct interviews and meetings with people properly. And I think businesses are missing that. They're just kind of letting people loose, and they're kind of doing that because of the circumstances and the fact that they're under pressure to do so, and sort of letting people loose. But I think as we move forward, you're gonna have to put some kind of processes in place, some training to make sure that people understand some of the things around etiquette, and equally train them on how to manage the candidates through the experience. So I think, joining instructions, really thorough login details to various video platforms, what they can expect during the process, ensure that they feel safe and that they're supported through that process, I think are going to have to be things that you build into all of your communication platforms when you're pushing your brand out there and your advertising opportunities, because people are going to look for that. And if it's not there, that will influence their decision as to whether pursue or progress under that particular process. I think the other thing then is to think about outsourcing partners. So, for me, that I don't mean recruiters necessarily. That's not a horrendous sales plug. However, I do think that there are platforms out there that can help manage some of the problems that you are going to potentially encounter in the coming months. It could be CV sorting, it could be managing vacancy adverts for you. It could be actually people who do the first stage of your recruitment process via online video applications and platforms. I think those kind of outsourcing partners may become more relevant in the coming months ahead as they try to support businesses, as they start to really learn about some of the practicalities that they're going to encounter in the coming months. Okay, so I think we're pretty much 20 minutes on the nose there, little bit less. what I wanted to do was try and allow some time for Q&A. Look, I hope that has been informative. I hope some people have got, you know, the odd one or two things to take away and think about. I'm happy to discuss things offline with people, and all my contact details are there, and can be reached out on LinkedIn as well. But Laura, what kind of questions have you started to get through the question panel?
We've had, do you think working from home for certain staff will be the norm going forward?
Yes, yeah, I do. I think it's probably more likely that we'll end up with some kind of hybrid model. Is my honest view. I've spoken to some businesses who work in sort of digital creative spaces, and they are seriously looking at whether they need their office at all, or rather look at it as almost like a hot desking environment, and just giving people the total autonomy to be able to work from home. I think there are other organizations like manufacturers who are looking at how do we reduce the concentration of people in one place. And if there are anyone in their organization who can work from home, we should encourage them to work from home, because that helps us with the social distancing that we need to employ moving forward. Mm-hmm. Obviously, a lot rests on what's going to start to be communicated on Sunday in the Prime Minister's announcement, and you know, we'll start to get a better feel for that. But you know, I think that is one thing that I can see. I think there are other businesses I've spoken to who are looking at shift patterns, and having people who work a couple of days from home and then the rest of the time in an office, but they have an alternate team, so they're swapping, again, to reduce the concentration. So I think working from home will definitely become more relevant. Certainly a lot of the businesses that we deal with in London, it seems to be much more prevalent in London, and in those kind of areas where there's lots of difficult commutes, lots of people who live outside of London who spend a couple of hours on the train network coming in. There are lots of different benefits from an environmental perspective, from a traffic perspective, from dead time on the train coming in, that they're just gaining because they're working from home and they can function just as effectively and maybe go to London once a week. But I think that's the answer I would give to that question.
Someone's asked, can you just explain what VUCA was again? They didn't quite catch that bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a concept called VUCA, and VUCA stands for volatile, unpredictable, complex, and ambiguous. And it's a concept that the American military developed when they were dealing in different kind of more modern types of warfare, and it's then been developed and applied into business. And it really just underpins the fact that we work in a world where change is just so aggressive and just happens so much more now than it ever has. But despite that, we still couldn't deal with the level of change that COVID-19 brought, because it was just so vast and so quick. And our world just wasn't set up for it at all.
From a recruitment point of view, how can a company who probably isn't technology ready make the first step changes for future recruitment?
That isn't technology ready?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I would. My honest response would be keep it simple. I think a degree of baby steps would need to be taken. I think to try and get your infrastructure right first. I think you've got to try and have an infrastructure that supports using new technologies. I think that, you know, I've heard some horror stories about businesses getting all excited about a new bit of software that they go off running and acquire, and their infrastructure just isn't capable of supporting it, and it falls over. So I think you know, using platforms like Zoom, web-based technologies, things like that, practice is good to try and practice your sort of your interaction. But my advice would be baby steps, and engage with people who kind of get people's opinion. You know, use these kind of forums to talk about the different platforms that are available, and see what fits with your level of technical capabilities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They've got to be fit for purpose. I don't think there's a one size fits all approach to this. I really don't. I think there will be some businesses where, you know, face-to-face interviewing will continue to be the way forward. And I think in those environments, that's fine. You've just got to make sure that you are really labouring on the support of social distancing and protecting people's health and all those kind of good things.
Yeah. Obviously, you touched on things around people's values and reevaluating things. Somebody's asked, do you think people's perhaps lower expenditure or reevaluation of where things are important may encourage some people to consider downsizing in job roles, perhaps, and not necessarily going for those big roles?
Sort of going for it. Yeah. You know what? I think that's a really, really interesting point. And I do think a lot of the changes that will come out of this are societal and about what people, you know, see as important. And I think there will be some people who will perhaps focus on quality of life rather than necessarily driving their careers and going for that next big promotion or whatever it needs to be. And that's going to have a couple of different effects, isn't it? You know, that's going to have an effect on the population at one level, which potentially will get bigger and create less opportunity. But what it will also do is mean that there'll be more pressure on the people at the top of the business as well, because there'll be less people wanting to progress there. So they're actually things that will potentially negatively impact the war, the war for talent and making it even more competitive. But I think you're right. I think people will make decisions about employment opportunities that are not necessarily materially based and more about lifestyle.
Yeah.
And businesses need to think. Businesses need to think about that, and they need to think about, well, are there things that we could do as an organisation that would create opportunities for us to acquire and attract more talent, which don't necessarily cost us money in terms of salary, but it's about us perhaps being more adaptable and flexible in terms of our working arrangements.
Yeah, because no longer are people used to the whole 9-to-5 setup anymore. But if the requirements are going to be very rigid again, some people may look at.
In technology, we've certainly seen that you know, certainly in the developer community within technology businesses, you know, there is that trend of working from home has been aggressively pursued over the last 10 years. But we're starting to see that now in wider industries now. And I think this is just kind of, it goes back to that adoption piece I said right on the first slide or the first couple of slides. You know, people are having to kind of swallow the pill because it's, you know, they're being forced to change. And actually when they've done it, they're sort of saying, oh, actually, it's not quite as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah. I don't know if anyone's got any more questions they want to ask, either through the chat facility.
Yeah, I've got one.
Yeah,
I've got one, Laura. It's all interesting stuff, Andrew. I think it really depends on your age profile. A lot of this discussion. I know a lot of people who are trying retirement before they buy at the moment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does make a lot of sense.
So there'll be a lot of people out there who are, particularly in automotive, who are coming towards their 55-year golden, whatever, Nissan or Faltech or whatever automotive company they work for, handshake. And they'll be thinking, well, hang on a minute, I'm not sure whether this is for me. So I think it opens up a lot of opportunity to keep the skill and the knowledge base of a company, which actually happens quite naturally. You find a lot of people leave organizations like Nissan and then get hired back as a consultant.
Oh, really common.
It's really common. So I think that's an advantage of this area, and it might make things a little bit more flexible for the employer. And I do think it's very dependent on the age at where you're at. This kind of situation.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think you raise a really interesting point. I think there are definitely, I know a big business in food manufacturing and 3 or 4 major employers in the oil and gas industry who are deeply concerned about the fact that they have aging work populations. I mean, one of the statistics from sort of nearly a decade ago now for the oil and gas industry was that 75% of the available workforce, skilled workforce in the oil and gas industry was within 10 years of retirement age. And this pandemic and this impact on the oil and gas industry, they are expecting to not just lose people temporarily, they're expecting to lose nearly 75% of their workforce permanently, because they're just going to take early retirement, if they can afford to do so. But it's going to affect, as you say, industries like the automotive industry, food industry, and it might present an opportunity for organizations to think more creatively about how they perhaps retain that skill in the business, but do so in a different way. Because there's no doubt about it, we don't have the level of the volume of skill and experience coming through. The education system has not been set up to support. It is much better now than it ever has been, but we've got a latent period coming, and that latent period, we're getting to it now, and this, I think, is just going to accelerate it.
Yeah. Agree. Can I just ask you something, Andrew? First of all, I'd like to say thank you for such a good presentation. Very informative and very relevant.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you.
Those of us who have logged on have been able to get a little bit more knowledge and a little bit more learning. But what I was going to say was that on speaking to people who we employ and then engaging with them on a daily basis to keep in touch with them, I think of what will come out of this, or one of the spin-offs from this, Andrew, will be a more loyal workforce, a lot of loyalty there. When they talk about a lot of them being furloughed, but the company paying them 100% of the money, that's a massive thing. And especially in automotive, where there's more people earning more than 40,000 than less than 30,000.
Yeah.
Historically, automotive with oil and gas has always been a big payer, and we have a lot of people who have been earning very, very well for a lot of years. So I think loyalty, dedication, a lot of flexibility, a lot of people saying to me, making statements to me that they historically I would never expect them to make about their willingness to be flexible, and also willingness to make themselves more value to the company by getting additional skills and additional learning. So I think that will bring out of this, I think, may come a more loyal and dedicated workforce. Because as we not restart but reset the business, we're doing things such as, when we look at social distancing, we have 5 factories, 5 buildings, lots of floors, lots of people, installing bells on every floor. If someone wants to enter a corridor, they've got to ring a bell to get access, and someone will come and see them. People who perhaps traditionally had been in a group of people, a team of people, maybe 7 people working together every day, maybe only 3 will work together in the office at any one time. The other 3 will be home-based, as you alluded to. So becoming more creative and really tearing up the old business and starting again and say, well, actually, we would never, ever think of working so flexibly. But actually, we want to rebuild our business, and we want to reset our business, and this is what we're going to have to do to achieve it. A lot of the business facilities, or the office facilities that we have, Andrew, is open plan offices, traditional Japanese model. You have the engineers down the middle, you have the managers to the side, and you have the managing director sitting in the plan office at the very top. So again, it's quite complicated how to actually reconfigure that. So we're actually, as a business, forced, as you were saying, things that we would never expect to have to change and be open to change. We are being forced to change, but we are willing to change because we have a business which you want to reset, re-establish, and grow again. So it's just interesting, and I think it's a great period within business where the smart people are really having to think longer term, and people have, or say they have, strategic plans, but the people who have the strategic plans are willing to buy into it, and the people who survive long term.
I think you make a number of really important points. I think employee loyalty is one, without a doubt. I think agility is a word that I think is undervalued, and that is just going to be the way forward. You know, I've seen massive businesses who are just having to be much more nimble and agile than they ever have done before because of that level of change. And I think that agility needs to then fall down into labor planning and talent planning and all that kind of thing, because, you know, businesses, I think, will pivot really quickly depending on how things evolve in the next 6 months. And as you say, things that are very traditional, that whole Japanese culture, that's the environment I came from in Tier 1, and it's been there for years, and it's steeped in the culture and the heritage of how you operate, and now having to change, and it's having to change, and there are going to be positive benefits that come out of this. There's no doubt about it, and we need to keep embracing those. So I mean, I'm a bit of a cynic, and I'm prepared to get shot down in flames here when I hear. I think the press are really, really good at reporting negative news, and maybe aren't so good at some of the great opportunities that are going to come about because of this horrendous pandemic. There will be opportunities for businesses, and businesses will evolve, and we'll come out the other side of it. And when I say all that, I don't mean to trivialize the fact that people are losing their lives, because that's the most important thing in this. But I think we all, as business leaders, HR professionals, industry figures, need to drive the positive message wherever we can, because there will be opportunities for our future generations to come, and it's our responsibility to make sure that we're better placed to fulfill those opportunities.
I agree.
Right.